Good morning. New York City Tourism and Conventions, the Tourism Board for New York City, is so pleased to partner with the WTTC, the World Travel and Tourism Council, once again this year at the Nest Climate Campus. Over the past decade, ESG has captured unprecedented attention from stakeholders, especially investors. It's in the news almost daily. The focus on climate change as an urgent existential issue propelled ESG growth, affecting companies across all industry sectors, including travel and tourism. Governments and institutions worldwide are mandating companies to disclose ESG practices and outcomes, shifting from volunteer to mandatory reporting. Europe and US are leading the way, introducing vital new ESG and climate reporting standards coming this year. In the midst of these changes, the World Travel and Tourism Council and consulting firm Oliver Wyman joined forces to produce a groundbreaking new report demystifying ESG requirements for brands across the globe in the travel and the tourism sector. The report provides an ESG readiness roadmap for the industry to understand which regulations will apply to them, to assess their ESG maturity level, and to prepare for the upcoming regulations set to take effect as early as next year. This morning, we bring you a discussion moderated by our friend Arnie Weissman, Editor-in-Chief of Travel Weekly, with experts from global companies Expedia, Amadeus, Marriott, and Oliver Wyman, who will discuss how travel and tourism can seize the opportunities presented by these future ESG requirements and really lead the sector towards a sustainable future. But first, here's a short video from Julia Simpson, President and CEO of the World Travel and Tourism Council.
Hello everyone, it's wonderful to be back in New York for this year's Climate Week. This event could not be happening at a more critical time for our global climate action. We're now, as we know, 8 years on from the Paris Agreement. Last year in Montreal, we also saw an historic signing of the United Nations Global Biodiversity Framework. So now it's really up to us in travel and tourism to lead the way and become a model for other sectors, the blueprint for how to meet the 1.5 degree target. So thank you all for being part of not just this week, but this journey. We're super grateful to Fred Dixon and the team at New York City Tourism and Conventions. A special welcome and word of thanks to our new partners for this year, Expedia, Oliver Wyman and Amadeus. Thank you so much. And of course, thanks to everyone at the Nest Climate Campus for having us yet again. Your iconic venue, a dedicated space where people can come together and spark together and make change, is a physical symbol of a much bigger, intangible shift that we are seeking all around the world. We have known for a long time that our sector must decarbonise. Moving people around the world, whether in the air, on the water or on land, is energy intensive, which is why I always say sustainable aviation fuel is critical for governments around the world to prioritise. Decarbonisation is not just an airline challenge, it's a challenge for all of us. Until recently, we didn't actually know what the size of our carbon footprint was. Last year at our Global Summit in Riyadh, we launched new research into our sector's impact. It covers 185 countries and is one of the largest research projects of its kind ever undertaken. If you can't count something, you can't control it. So quantifying for the very first time tourism's global carbon footprint, as well as things like pollution levels, water use, our impact with our communities, is really critical. But what we found actually really surprised us. Today, travel makes up around 8% of total global emissions. And our research found something else. Between 2010 and 2019, our sector's GDP grew at about 4.3% every year. But our carbon emissions increased by just 2.4% a year. This means that the link between our sector's growth and its carbon footprint has been broken. And in more than 20 countries around the world, emissions have decreased in absolute terms, despite expanding tourism, proving categorically that we can grow and be sustainable. These are signs of progress, but we cannot afford to be complacent. Global temperatures are rising and many species are still threatened. And in response, governments are making structural changes to the way companies disclose information about their environmental, social, and governance practices. And tourism is no exception. And travel providers now face new mandatory requirements that will come into effect as early as next year. We thought it was important to support the sector in getting ready. So at the WTTC, we've collated expertise from leaders in ESG and corporate governance around the world to create a single source of guidance for travel and tourism. Now, you might think reporting is one of the least interesting parts of climate change, but it is perhaps the most transformative thing in sustainable tourism. Businesses will need to reorientate the way they think about their operations from the ground up. So for anyone interested, our new report in partnership with our dear partners Oliver Wyman is out now. None of us can afford to ignore this agenda. The natural world is our sector's most precious resource, and getting to net zero is our most urgent imperative. The new ESG rules are a once-in-a-generation shift. If there is one thing that brings the immense hope, it is events like this. This week, every leader from business, politics, science and activism will be right here in New York. This is where it's happening. And it's up to us to make our voice heard. So thank you all again for your incredible support, and I hope you have an inspiring week. Please take time to go onto the wonderful garden roof terrace. It's fabulous, I can assure you. Thank you, one and all.
And now, please welcome our moderator for our next session, Editor-in-Chief and EVP, Travel Weekly, and Executive Vice President, Editorial Director for North Star Travel Group, Arnie Weissman.
Good morning, everybody. The pandemic hit the travel industry particularly hard, and the industry is still feeling the impact. While on the one hand, travel boomed this summer, travelers were trying to make up for lost time, the industry is still struggling with staffing shortages. Business travel has not come back nearly as to the levels that it was prior, and on the other hand, over-tourism has returned as strong as ever. But on the very positive side, there's never been more awareness of the importance of environmental sustainability, the importance of serving host communities among the travel companies. And this comes hand in hand with the rise in ESG. Investors, employees, customers want to know that companies are behaving responsibly. And where previously the reporting was voluntary, climate change as an urgent existential issue has driven both, particularly the EU and the US, to begin crafting legislation that's going to mandate certain aspects of ESG reporting, and these new standards are going to have significant impacts on companies. So as Kelly referenced, in the midst of all these changes, the World Travel and Tourism Council and the research firm Oliver Wyman have come together to really help us all better understand the ESG requirements that are about to come. The report is sort of a roadmap for upcoming regulations, and we're going to explore that on our panel today, some of the implications of these. So let me introduce my panelists first. From Oliver Wyman, the research partner for WTTC, the principal in the transportation and services practice, Dan Darcy. From Expedia Group, Aditi Mohapatra, Vice President of Global Social Impact and Sustainability. Please welcome Marriott International's Vice President of Sustainability and Supplier Diversity, Denise Naguib. And beaming in from Madrid, from the Reservation and Global Distribution System Amadeus, its Group Environmental Officer and Head of ESG Reporting, Lucas Bobis. Thank you all for joining us today. I know some of you have traveled a bit to get here. I'm going to start with you, Dan. So, in collaboration with WTTC, you've got this comprehensive analysis of proposed government regulations. The travel industry is very complex. It's everything from mom and pop businesses to mega multinational corporations. Perhaps let's begin with some insights into how the new ESG reporting regulations are going to impact companies of various sizes in various locales and of various levels of sophistication when it comes to environmental and sustainability issues. So why don't we start there?
Perfect. Thanks, Arnie. As you mentioned, travel and tourism industry is very complex. When you think about large global multinational companies, hotels, airlines, cruise lines, they have operations, many of them, the large ones, have operations all around the world. So they may be subject to many different jurisdictions. So we think for those large organizations, there's some urgency here in terms of the upcoming regulations, particularly if they have operations in the European Union. So this is certainly front and center on their agenda with potential reporting required as soon as 2024. For small and medium-sized businesses, which make up about 80% of the travel and tourism industry, it could be a little bit longer in terms of those specific requirements. That being said, what a lot of the focus is on for those organizations is if they're suppliers or value chain partners with some of those large companies that are required to disclose their Scope 3 emissions, they're going to be getting asked for that data as a supplier of one of those reporting companies. So I think for some of those small and medium-sized enterprises, some of the disclosure requirements might be coming sooner than they expect.
Okay, and just to clarify, Scope 3 has to do with the supply chain. In other words, ensuring that the people who give you what you don't own are also following your standards.
Exactly, and one challenge that we heard from the travel and tourism members, the WTTC members that we talked to, was there are many shared suppliers among the big travel and tourism organizations. So the fear is that each of these small suppliers is going to be asked for many different types of data from these different partners. And if there's a way to standardize that, that would make it a lot easier for smaller organizations that don't have potentially the resources that the larger companies do.
So for a large international company, would it make sense for them to look at what are the most demanding requirements, sort of tailor their ESG protocols around that? But it's very possible, I would imagine, that the American and European regulations are going to have some significant differences. What have you learned so far about those two jurisdictions which are going to have the biggest impact?
Definitely. I would say generally there is a lot of overlap amongst the frameworks that are being developed and that are being finalized. When you think about ESRS in the European Union, the SEC rules within the US, and then ISSB internationally, which is going to be tailored to each individual jurisdiction, they're all built upon the platform of TCFD. So in and of itself.
You're going to have to fill in some of these letters. I've been following you until you got to that.
Perfect. I'll keep it broader. The European Union rules, the US rules from the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the international rules. Those are really the three areas that we looked at within the report. And they're all really established on TCFD, which was a voluntary reporting framework that was established, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So that is really, because that's the foundation for many of these new frameworks, there's a lot of similarities already embedded in them. Now, what we have heard with some of the uncertainty in the United States around the SEC rule, what we have heard from some of the members even if they're US based, they might be multinational with some operations in Europe and internationally. They are looking at the EU rules and potentially even complying with those rules despite them being the most strict, to give them some certainty and recognizing that the US rules and other international rules will probably not be as strict, and there will be that interoperability between them.
Yeah. And Aditi, is Expedia Group sort of following that path? How are you preparing?
Yeah, well, thank you, first of all, for having me here. A lot is happening across the business to get ready. I mean, there is no doubt a lot of complexity in what was just described in the alphabet soup of ESG reporting. And so we're doing a number of things to kind of get ready. I think just to start, I mean, it is an interesting place to be in where now kind of compliance is usually viewed as like the bare minimum. And now compliance is kind of raising the bar on what we have to get done, which is just like a whole new era for ESG reporting. They're very intense requirements, right? And they're going to be very expansive. They need to be audited. They need to be assured. And so it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a large effort to kind of come into compliance with those. So we're doing a number of things to get ready. We've established internal governance structures and processes that help us kind of get going to make sure we have the right oversight, we have the right partnership across the business to be able to meet the demands that are being set out. We're also putting in place, we're also reviewing kind of the current data sets that we collect and the quality with which we collect them. Again, these are going to need to be independently assured. And so we need to raise the bar on all of that as well. So when you move out of voluntary space, where we've been reporting for a long time, into a regulatory space, there's obviously just kind of a depth and professionalism around that data that needs to improve as well. And then we are putting in place, we've done a number of new processes to get ready as well. So we've completed our climate risk assessment, which informs that TCFD reporting that Dan just spoke about. We've put together our first ever climate action plan that will be released soon, which describes kind of our approach to the issues of climate change and our strategies in this space. And we've just, taken a number of different efforts to really start getting going.
Yeah. And Lucas, I want to reassure you we remember you're here. I'm going to go to Denise with one question, then I'll come back to you. So Denise, the ESG standards are being written for all industries, not just for travel and tourism, but even within a single industry like travel, there are sectors that behave very, very differently. If you run an airline versus a hotel company like Marriott, you may both have a reservation system, you may have loyalty programs, but everything else can be very, very different. So do you anticipate that, for instance, among the hospitality industry, there's just going to be a lot of sharing of practices and guidance? Or is it possible that ESG could be one of those areas that if you have a system that is superior to others, it kind of gives you a competitive advantage even?
I thank you so much, first of all, for having me. I not only anticipate, but we've been at it for over a decade as an industry, hospitality, to work together and create these methodologies so that we can all be working towards the same goal and competing on the back end. Trust me when I say we're very competitive still, but working on the front end to make sure that we're all doing the math in the same way is critical. And in 2011, we came together as a group under what is now the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance to develop a series of methodologies to calculate carbon footprint together and using that same math, water footprint, and most recently for waste. So those are three really important ways by which we as an industry have created this together based on what we know about our business. We have put it out in a public domain so that others can use it, so that small, medium business group of 80% that make up 80% can also tap into the same methodologies. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. And then that way we can create the way that we can communicate back to our travelers that those data points in a consistent manner. So as a traveler, you know when you're getting the data from us or from one of our competitors, you are doing so in a way, understanding that there's a comparability factor there. So that's a really important step that we took a very long time ago, and continue to modify and improve things as we need to, but that was foundational to what we've been doing for the last decade. And again, we compete on the outcome, the metric on the other end, and again, using that clarity in process, we can communicate to our customers that you can compare these data points. There are a lot of nuances. Obviously, if you're looking at a carbon footprint of a hotel in a certain market, it's going to look different in other markets based on where that energy is coming from. But ultimately is the starting point. We've also come together and created a pathway for net positive hospitality, and that really is, again, guidance for where do you even start, how do you take yourself on the journey, how do you make sure that you're not jumping to, taking major action before you even have that foundational understanding of where you are. And so I think from a hospitality perspective, we've been collaborating a long time on this, and I think there are continually opportunities to do more collaboration. But what I've heard from some of my colleagues in the airlines is that they were, pretty impressed with hospitality had been doing this for a while, and then started to have conversations amongst themselves again of how they should be tackling this. So I think it's a model that can be really looked at. We absolutely all need to win, and so I think the competition is really important, but we also don't need to have 18 million ways to do something. And overarchingly, I mean, some of the topics that Dan brought forward, the methodologies on how you collect these emissions for the industry, for your company, are very set in stone. Greenhouse gas protocols have been around for a long time. They're used by, I think, 99% of companies that do their disclosures. So it's not like we're reinventing the way that we do it. We're just taking those insights and really creating a sector-specific approach for ultimately you as a consumer to be able to leverage.
Is that data that you've been putting together as an alliance aggregated and open to the public to see?
Great question, and yes. So if you go to a website called hotelfootprints.org, you can see not by individual hotel, but for each city, what the range is by type of hotel. So, luxury hotel in New York City is going to have a different range of carbon footprint than a select hotel. And so those data sets are available. You can do, estimated calculations if you want before you go to a place, or if you're hosting a meeting, you can put in some parameters and get based on the average data for the sector. And then individual companies are doing different things. For us at Marriott, on the Marriott.com site for each individual hotel, you can see the carbon and the water footprint for each of the hotels individually. So if you go on there and it's validated data, you'll be able to see that metric and use that as a comparison point. So other companies may be doing something similar. But ultimately, we're trying to put that out there transparently so that, again, the travelers can have a data point that matters to them. It's a lot easier to say, oh, my carbon footprint is X per room night, than to have this massive number of what is, our company's scope 1, 2, and 3. Like, that doesn't make sense for the individual.
Yeah, I would imagine that ultimately the research company or consumer group might look, if you're not having it aggregated on that website, at your individual sites and begin to see some rankings. I would
Exactly.
imagine. Yeah. Especially with all these new details that will be coming out. Lucas, hola, how are you?
Hola. I'm very pleased to join the panel, even if remotely from Madrid. So, yeah, very, very much happy to join you.
So Amadeus, and for those of you who may not know, Amadeus started out as just a reservation system, has grown to be a huge, maybe the largest in the world, consulting organization to the travel industry. It still has its reservation components, but has added layer using the data that they can and the insights they have expanded pretty significantly. Was that a pretty good summation of Amadeus?
Thank you, Arnie. I think it was definitely. Yeah, we have diversified, especially to the IT sector a few years ago. And that's also a fundamental component of our sustainability value proposition, as we like to call it.
Yeah, so you're aiming to be carbon neutral in 2025. Has your review of the proposed ESG regulations sparked any ideas about what next? Because carbon neutral is already a pretty good hurdle to overcome, but so where do you think you're going from there?
Well, I think that the incoming regulation, especially I would say after the pandemic, has shifted completely the point of view in which we are looking at these things in the industry, from all stakeholders, from things that were a few years ago, especially indirect emissions, scope 3 emissions, nice to have, are becoming mandatory either legally or because of the expectations of our different stakeholders. So definitely this has pushed us to take more firm commitments, we have recently, we are working on a plan to commit to science-based target initiative and expect to be validated next year. It is I mean, the new regulation, particularly the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, I will avoid the acronym, is a new piece of regulation that I think is what Dan was referring to, that is going to be implemented, enforced for the 2024 reporting. And I think it makes an important change. It's not only requesting pieces of information in the form of KPIs, but it's also requiring documented plans about what is going to be the strategy, for example, to mitigate the emissions released by the company and our value chain. I would also like to add that the regulations are not only sparking ideas, but I would say also suggestions. And following on from the presentation before from Ms. Brovas-Ciotti on social justice, I think some of these principles can be also applied to climate change in particular, particularly that idea that those that are closer to the problem are also closer to the solution. We perceive, in our particular case, and I think this is due in part because let's say that our direct impact in terms of emissions is relatively small compared to those all stakeholders with which we work, particularly airlines. And also following on from what Julia said, the challenge of decarbonization is not only from airlines. We have to be involved in that, and we have to do our job to help them achieve that objective. And so what we are missing a little bit in the regulation is that we are perceived, in my opinion, in many respects, as a source of problems. You have to report how much emissions do you release as a consequence of your burning of fuel, how much emissions are released in your data processing, in our case, delivering the solutions. But I think we should entertain a discussion also about what is the solution that we are bringing. I mean, just to give you a more visual example, I'm sure most, if not all, of the attendees in the audience have been experiencing large airports like JFK, situations in which you are stranded in an aircraft waiting to take off simply because there is a large queue of aircraft. I would like the US regulators to come up to me and say, well, you are a technology company. Are you not able to solve this? And if you are, what can be done to do it? Because we do have some solutions for that particular problem that is very visible and others. And I think we are missing that component to a large extent.
Thank you. And Dan, the regulations, my understanding is that they are one set for all industries. Is that correct? So can you imagine that they will begin, after this has been established, to start setting perhaps additional requirements for different industrial sectors, so that travel and tourism might have some reporting that is not in a mining company?
Definitely. I think as we start out, most of it will be general in terms of what the travel and tourism industry will have to comply with. They have hinted at additional sector-specific requirements. So for example, the international requirements, the ISSB, they've already hinted at specific and recommend for the airline industry, the cruise line industry, and hotels, industry-specific metrics that they'll be recommending disclosure of. Now, what's interesting about the international rules is it's a recommendation, and individual countries can decide how to implement them and how to actually apply them within their own borders. So I think there'll be a question there to understand, will that recommendation be included for a specific country, or will that country potentially go even further, where there might be, if you look at a country like Costa Rica or Bhutan or Thailand, where the tourism industry is a very large portion of the GDP of the country, would they potentially go further than what the recommendations are in that specific sector?
So potentially all 192 member states of the UN could each have their own requirement, which would only apply if you do business in that thing. Now, one of the things, of course, when the internet became regulated in terms of privacy, even though a company might be based outside of Europe. If their website was accessible within Europe, then they still had to. So do you imagine that if someone's website is available in 190 countries, that they are going to have to keep an eye on every one of those countries' regulations?
I think at a high level, most of what we're talking about will be interoperable, where I think maybe there will be some edge cases. And something that we are hearing is that there are, especially for the large corporations that have those tentacles, I wouldn't say websites, but certainly boots on the ground, employees, revenue generated in a specific country. It is important to continue to monitor the status and what those specific rules might look like.
And do you anticipate that it might go beyond what it's doing into the point of even social issues, where they might say, all of this profit, there's so much leakage, you need to, if you want to be in our country, return or take out only X%? Do you anticipate this sort of thing?
There's definitely, as we look, I mean, when you look at the rules as they are today, it's very focused on environmental. But as they look at phasing these in and what the next steps are, certainly social issues, governance, the other factors for ESG, and even biodiversity, where you look at what was TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-related Financial Disclosures. Now they've set up TNFD, kind of within the same framework, the Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures. I think there is a question of how does this evolve over time? We're very focused on environmental right now. There is, very similar industry-wide when you look at the different frameworks. There's a lot of interoperability around them, but that is going to evolve as it gets implemented and as it reaches more organizations and not just the large multinational companies.
Yeah. So, Lucas, most surveys that I've seen conclude that only a minority of travelers will pay a higher price to have a sustainable trip. I know your company uses the International Civil Aviation Organization's carbon calculator on your distribution platforms to inform customers during the booking process about the greenhouse gas emissions that they might release during the trip and how they can compensate for them. Can you, perhaps through the bookings that go through your system, measure the effectiveness of this tool and whether it's had any impact on increasing sustainable travel?
Well, as you mentioned, it's true that all the surveys, and actually we see that in practice, it is hard to see the volumes that we would want of customers that will be ready to pay for sustainable travel. And so we have to wonder why that is happening and how can we change that. And I think that we can look at easily two main reasons. One is that maybe they are expecting some other player in the industry to do that for them. Maybe it can be the travel provider, it can be someone else. But there is an important component, and I think Denise touched on it before, which is clarity, and transparency of the information. I mean, just to illustrate it a little bit, when you are trying to make a booking for yourself, okay, you look at fundamental pieces of information to make a choice, which is the schedules, the availability of the flight, and also the fare. All of these pieces of information are sort of unquestionable and very much straightforward. But if you want to choose sustainability as another factor to make your choice, then it becomes much more difficult because you have to say, okay, how do I consider sustainability? Do I refer to CO2 emissions alone? And if I do that, how do I calculate that? Especially if I am making a booking 3 months in advance when I don't even know what aircraft is going to fly, probably. So it becomes very, very a difficult topic, unfortunately, and that is why we wanted to, first of all, reach a level of precision that this can be acceptable. But once that is reached, I think we are in a situation now in which consensus is much more important than hitting the exact figure. And I think in the hospitality sector, Denise explained it very well. The initiative from SHA, I think, is brilliant. And we are trying to do the same in the aviation sector. We have actually joined forces with other players in the industry, with Expedia, for example, joining the Travelist Coalition, that I think is a first initiative in the world that gathers a number of players in the industry with the same objective of providing a common framework to bring transparency to the traveler, and also in a sort of what they call pre-competitive manner, so that we join forces with our competitors even in that effort. So that area of bringing clarity, not only about reporting the emissions, but also giving options about which option is better, and also doing it in a consistent and homogeneous manner, regardless of what channel of distribution you use. I think it's an effort where we need to work more on our side if we want to see those figures in the service and in reality to go up.
Thank you. Denise, in light of the increasing frequency of and intensity of climate-related events, how is Marriott managing climate risks such as extreme weather events, sea level rise, and have you noticed that this has had an impact on bookings? For instance, are people less likely to book Florida and the Caribbean during a hurricane season, or perhaps avoid Canada during a dry season for fear of wildfires?
Yeah, great question. So I think one of the things that's really interesting is we have done a climate risk assessment of our hotels, starting with the US and Canada, which is our largest footprint. We don't own our assets. We own a few dozen of the 8,700 plus hotels. And so the impacts are really greatest to our owners. And so part of the process that we went through to do these evaluations was to have information to share back with our owners, to let them know this is what the issues may be in your particular situation. What are some of the ways that maybe they can be considered as they're trying to do some of the renovations, or thinking about what should they be doing to try to build in resiliency. Climate change is here. We know the impacts are already having a lot of extreme damage to assets, and it's really important that the hotels and others that have those assets on the ground are addressing that resiliency piece first, because it's the mitigation stuff is also happening, but they're feeling it today. So one of the things I think are not yet visible is what does that mean for the traveler? I don't know that most people really have a great sense of, oh, this is a higher risk versus a lower risk, unless something happens. So I was just talking to some of our general managers in Greece, and they have felt, for example, this summer, an impact to their own business because of the fires, even in places where the fires haven't anywhere come to near touching. But that concept of people feel that there's a risk there and therefore are making a different decision, especially if they don't necessarily have to go there, right? They may say, okay, well, I was going to go to Greece, but maybe I'll go to Italy instead, or something, that they can make a switch if they haven't already committed to that. So I think it's starting to come up in some of those ideas, because absolutely, I mean, how many of us would be like, yeah, I'm going to run into the fire? No, right? You don't make that decision if you can choose otherwise. So I think as these become more frequent, as these impacts are greatest in certain locations, I am sure our industry is going to start feeling that. Either people traveling at different times or people traveling to different places because of those potential impacts. And part of it is it has a little bit of a long tail. A hurricane could have hit somewhere 5 years ago, and that may still be stuck. Oh, that place was damaged by a hurricane, therefore it's not ready to receive me. So there might be a little bit of sort of that, response to something that happened a long time ago. But I think, again, given the growth in these impacts throughout, we are absolutely, as an industry, going to continue to feel that.
How much influence do you have with an owner in the sense of you see something, because they represent your brand.
Yep.
They are the face of your brand, even though they are the owners and not managers. So if you see something that you feel is going the wrong way for any number on these ESG things, can you put pressure to the point of enforcing that things change, or do you have to just suggest?
We have some sticks, if you call it, right, in terms of that. One of the biggest things is for us is that we require all of our hotels to disclose information so that we can gather this data on their carbon footprint, their water footprint, their environmental practices, The carrot associated with that is that the top line revenue piece. So for over a decade, the Global Business Travel Association has had a centralized set of questions in the RFP that over 5,000 of our RFPs include around sustainability. What we tell our owners is responding to these questions in our centralized system makes it so that you have a seat at the table when these RFPs come in. You don't do what we're asking of you, you can't get in front of these questions that come through on the RFP, because you can't just answer them independently. They have to be validated through our process, including, like I said, the carbon and water data, because it has to go through some math. And so that's a little bit of the carrot for the ownership group, is whether you believe in what's going on, whether you're bought in, whether you want to invest, the end of game is that this information is already visible to our customers. So you have a choice if you want that to be able to compete for that business. You play the game, you do what needs to be done, you enter your information, and so on. And that's where I think we're going to start seeing a little bit more of the competitiveness to drive some of those behavior changes. We do have a process to embed more and more sustainability into the design standards. That's where we have the biggest opportunity with the owners on the very front end, right? As long as we are saying, yes, you can build a hotel, and with our brands, you are building it to certain specifications, right? And so we are embedding it so that on that front end piece, you're already receiving sort of some more sustainability attributes built in, because once it's built, you know, those are not things we can change very easily, right? And so some of these things are sort of being infused, and some of them are being suggested. One thing as we've rolled out, we just finalized our submission to Science-Based Target, and we will be providing individual hotels and thereby owners the guidance on how to tackle these issues. We have very different scales of owners. We have owners that are real estate investment trusts, and they've got support mechanisms behind them to look at things in a very granular way. We have others that literally are individuals like us who own a hotel. And so we really need to make sure that we're also providing that guidance to the variety of owners that we have so that they can really do something about it, because it is absolutely going to be a partnership, as Dan was talking about before, with the suppliers. All of us, the entire ecosystem needs to work together to try to solve some of these challenges. It's not just one part of the system.
Thank you. So Aditi, Expedia Group's operations have been carbon neutral since 2017. You purchase renewable energy equivalent to 100% of your global office consumption in 2021. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So what areas still need work?
Yeah, so we've been proud of the efforts that we've made to date, and we're really excited to be able to announce that we are setting our own net zero goal for our operations, where we will be net zero by 2040. We're committing to that. We're also committing to the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and we'll be setting near-term reduction goals for Scope 1 and Scope 2, 75% by 2030, and then working with our suppliers as well to commit to the Science-Based Targets Initiative as well. So we're really excited to be able to move kind of forward on our journey from carbon neutral into a space of decarbonization, where we're really taking kind of more direct action across our operations.
That sounds good. So, Dan, is the report that Oliver Wyman has produced with WTTC available to the public? And if so, how can people get a look at it?
Definitely. So it will be. And first of all, a huge thank you to Denise, Aditi, and Lucas, and all the WTTC members and the partnership with WTTC itself. It's been really exciting to talk to a lot of members across all the many industries within travel and tourism, and to see the engagement and the excitement about the folks that we've talked to, who are really, really interested in moving the industry forward and meeting these sustainability challenges. The report is coming out, so we're kind of giving a few teasers. We're going to be releasing a number of reports that are going to be sharing the insights from the report, and then the full report we're expecting to come out alongside COP28 and the WTTC Global Summit, which is coming up in early November. So you can find all that information on World Travel and Tourism Council's website, WTTC, as well as Oliver Wyman's, and that will also be in publications as well, and it'll all be publicly available.
All right. Well, thank you all. I've got like pages more questions. It was really interesting, you know, when you talk about regulations, you never know how dry it's going to be. And you all have made it very interesting and understandable and relatable. And actually, I'm really interested in looking at how this will roll out. It sounds like it's going to be smooth, but you know, you never know. So thank you very much, ladies
Thanks,
and
Arnie.
gentlemen.
Thank you all.
Please